Ladies and gentlemen, please can you take your seats for the afternoon session, which starts with politics. We have two parliamentarians here. We have Greg Smith, MP for Buckinghamshire. Thank you, Greg. A Conservative, and we have a former Conservative, David Jones, and now Reform Head of Wales. Please can I ask you both up on stage, David Jones and Greg Smith. Now, we have a slight time constraint because Greg is a Division Bell slave, even though David no longer is so. Greg gets to go first with his 15-minute chat, and he might suddenly, rudely walk out on us because he has to vote on something to do with human rights. It's probably not important. Ladies and gentlemen, Greg Smith will now speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Good afternoon, everyone. It really is a pleasure to be here among friends, colleagues, fellow custodians of the countryside, people who care deeply about the land, about wildlife, and about the traditions that connect us to both. As Charlie has said, if I do have to dash out, normally 2 to 3 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon is quite a safe time from votes in the House of Commons, but the leader of what is in the House of Commons, 5th or 6th party, is forcing a vote on the European Convention on Human Rights this afternoon, and that's not a vote that any politician worth their salt would miss, so I apologise if I do need to run away slightly early when the bell rings. Now, my constituency is the proud home to the Kimberwick Hunt and the Bicester and Wadden Chase hunt across mid-Buckinghamshire as well. And I certainly am absolutely at one with everyone who has a passion for shooting, for hunting, and for the rural way of life. But more than that, I think we are all united by a belief that the countryside is not a relic to be preserved behind glass. It's a living, working system that depends on balance, understanding, and care. And the government's pledge to consult on, with a view to banning trail hunting entirely within this Parliament, strikes at the very heart of that balance. Likewise, their upcoming consultation on shotgun and firearms licensing. Their moves are driven more by ideology than evidence, and their moves are ones that threaten not just hunting and shooting, but the entire framework of rural conservation, stewardship, and community life. So today I want to speak very plainly about why this matters, about what is truly at stake, and about why we must not allow this new wave of political hostility to destroy what generations of countrymen and women have built. Let's start with some facts. Countryside makes up over 90% of our land area, contributes more than £250 billion to the English economy alone each year. That's not a hobby economy. That's the beating heart of food production, tourism, conservation, and heritage. Nearly 10 million people live and work in rural England alone. They are farmers, keepers, farriers, vets, builders, butchers, and the rest. They are the stewards of 70% of our natural environment, and yet too often are treated as though their way of life were an inconvenience, something to be managed from Westminster rather than understood. There is endless talk about revitalizing rural communities, green growth, whatever that means, but we forget that both depend on a vibrant, functioning countryside. I want to see a working countryside, one that's productive, biodiverse, and alive, not regulated into paralysis or sacrificed for political theatre. Labour's proposed consultation on banning trail hunting may sound harmless enough to many, particularly those living in urban communities. But make no mistake, if enacted, it would effectively wipe out the last remaining lawful forms of mounted hunting in this country. And it would not stop there. Once the precedent is set, the logic extends to falconry, to stalking, to pest control. each with their own distinct rules, traditions, and ecological roles. The blunt instrument of a ban would trample all over it. And yet, this consultation is being advanced at a time when the public has far more pressing concerns. Energy bills, food prices, rural transport, the very future of farming. Trail hunting harms no animals, follows the laid scent, as the law demands. But the political optics are irresistible to those who see hunting not as a matter of welfare, but as a symbol of class. And that is why hunting in all its forms has become such a political football, a distraction dressed up as virtue, and it needs action, not apathy. Let's remind ourselves what's really at stake. Hunting isn't a pastime of privilege, it is a community institution. The local hunt everywhere binds together farmers, riders, farriers, kennelmen, supporters, raises thousands for charity, provides work for dozens of trades that might otherwise vanish, sustains a rhythm of rural life that teaches responsibility, discipline, and respect for animals and land. These hunts are living history, the product of centuries of adaptation and evolution. To destroy them now would be to sever one of the oldest and most enduring cultural threads in our national tapestry. The other side, as someone who shoots myself, I know how seriously people in the field take their responsibilities. We are conservationists as much as sportsmen. Every shot, every quarry, every decision is weighed against a duty of care to the land. The same is true for hunting, where the welfare of hounds and horses are bound by codes far stricter than anything imagined by those who legislate from a distance. The current legal framework around hunting is a patchwork of exemptions, contradictions, and ambiguities. There are exemptions for flushing to guns, for falconry, for stalking, for research, for land management, all necessary, all lawful, all part of the same web of wildlife control and conservation. But that complexity has made the Hunting Act unworkable. It is a law built on compromise and confusion, one that even its own architects have come to regret. Tony Blair, who'd have thought it, himself has admitted himself that pushing the Hunting Act through Parliament was, in his words, and I quote, one of the domestic legislative measures I most regret. He recognised that it consumed vast amounts of parliamentary time, alienated rural communities, and achieved little in practice. Indeed, even when I think back to those days, until they introduced the family farm tax, the only time I'd ever taken a placard and marched on the streets of London was the countryside march all those years ago. It became, as Blair said himself, a symbolic fight, not a practical policy, a way of feeding political divisions rather than solving real problems. Yet rather than learning from that history, rather than clarifying or improving a flawed law, Labour now proposes to tear the whole thing down and start again. Not to make it fairer, not to make it clearer, but to appease a noisy minority who will never be satisfied until every vestige of hunting and field sports has disappeared completely from our countryside. If Labour get their way, those exemptions will vanish. The very practices that keep our countryside healthy, predator management, disease control, habitat restoration, would be criminalised. We cannot let that happen. The rural economy is already under pressure. The family farm tax, for example, will and is already driving fragmentation and sell-offs across the country. Family holdings will be broken up, homes will be lost, and there is no guarantee that the land will remain agricultural. Some of it will go to developers, some to speculative investors, and some simply to seed import dependency, higher food prices for everyone, and less homegrown produce. That is not stewardship, that is a slow erosion. And yet it is being justified in this curious word, modernisation. The truth is, you cannot have a sustainable countryside without sustainable livelihoods. You cannot preserve biodiversity if you drive out the very people who manage it. And that brings us back to the role of hunting and shooting in the rural economy. The last government recognised this. It supported game bird shooting. Well, we occasionally had to put them back on the right track, precisely because of the benefits it brings, not only to recreation, but to habitat management and biodiversity. Across the UK, gamekeepers manage over 2 million hectares of land for wildlife. They maintain the cover crops, hedgerows and ponds. They control predators that threaten ground nesting birds. They provide food and refuge for countless species beyond the game itself. This is practical conservation, paid for by rural communities, not imposed from above. The current government, however, has been ambiguous. It is unclear whether it will support or restrict these activities, and that uncertainty chills investment, depresses morale, and undermines the very progress we all claim to want. If we are serious about a greener, more sustainable countryside, we should be championing the very people already doing the work. Through the countryside stewardship grants, thousands of farmers and land managers are restoring hedgerows, replanting trees, and managing habitats for wildlife. These programs depend on practical experience, on knowing when to cull and when to conserve, when to cut and when to leave. They depend on the knowledge that hunting, shooting, and rural work have preserved for generations. Wildlife management isn't about sentiment, it's about sustainability. Too many foxes and lamb losses rise. Too many deer and young woodlands fail to regenerate. Too few gamekeepers and invasive predators take over. This is the natural balance that hunting helps to maintain. It's worth remembering that over 70% of the UK's biodiversity is found on privately managed land. Without active stewardship and that kind hunts, keepers, and farmers provide, our countryside would not be a sanctuary but a wasteland. All of this happening while Britain faces enormous rural challenges, collapsing farm incomes, a veterinary workforce in crisis, decaying infrastructure, and a broken housing market that prices out young rural families. And yet somehow Labour want to spend precious parliamentary time, once again, trail hunting. An activity that harms, as I said, no animal, that employs thousands and sustains centuries of community. It's the wrong battle at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. No one is saying hunting should be above the law, but the law should be rational, proportionate, and rooted in evidence, not ideology. The future of our countryside deserves better than to be reduced to a culture war headline. As we stand here today, we must acknowledge the pressure ordinary country people face, not only from confused laws, but from those who take it upon themselves to enforce their own ideology in the fields. Hunt saboteurs are not romantic heroes. They are aggressors. They trespass, intimidate, damage property, spread abuse, not just towards huntsmen and women, but towards farmers, farriers, rural workers, simply trying to go about their livelihoods. Many of these people are doing what their families have done for generations, working within the law and within their communities. The presence of saboteurs has turned peaceful meets into points of confrontation and fear. And of course, every incident is instantly filmed, edited, and plastered across social media, stripped of its context, designed only to inflame and mislead. These online campaigns distort reality, vilify communities, and feed the outrage machine of those that will never set foot in the countryside, but are all too eager to pass judgment on it. That is not a healthy debate. It's a persecution disguised as activism, and it's time we called it out. Yet we must also be wise, because here lies the risk. The louder the countryside shouts, the more the so-called champagne socialists of North London will clutch their pearls and demand another ban. The very people who dine out talking about tolerance and inclusion are often the first to sneer at the culture, the livelihoods, and the heritage of rural Britain. That is why we must strike a careful balance, to speak firmly, but with reason, to defend our way of life, but to do so with clarity, evidence, and dignity. There is, after all, a gentle reality check needed here. There are far more pressing hurdles facing this government before we get anywhere near the Hunting Act again. Our job as advocates, as custodians, and as citizens is to make sure it stays that way. Because let's be honest, Labour will never be on the side of our countryside. Time and time again, when faced with a choice between rural livelihoods and urban ideology, they choose the latter. They talk about fairness inclusion, but they legislate in ignorance of the people who feed, farm, and protect this land. They say they care about nature, but they ignore those who live closest to it. They say they care about fairness, but they treat rural Britain as a museum, somewhere to visit at the weekend, not a place to live and work. And so it falls to us, the rural community, the farming families, the keepers, the hunts, the riders, the guns, and the hounds, to remind them that the countryside is not theirs to tinker with, it is ours to protect. We will do so with evidence, with science, and with pride. Because hunting, shooting, and rural management are not crimes. They are acts of stewardship. They are part of a sustainable, functioning countryside that feeds the nation, conserves the land, and honors its heritage. The truth is simple. Britain cannot thrive if her countryside is broken. And that is why, despite the noise, despite the protests, and despite the politics, we will continue to stand for our way of life, for our rural communities, and for the generations who will follow in our footsteps.
Beautifully put. Thank you very much. I think we have a title for next year's conference, which is Clarity, Evidence and Dignity. David, are you going to say the same thing? Ladies and gentlemen, David Jones from Reform.
Well, Charlie, thank you very much for that introduction, and it's a huge pleasure to be here today, and thanks very much to Hunting Kind for organizing this. And may I say, what a great pleasure it is to be on the same platform as my good friend Greg Smith. We spent an interesting few days together in Gibraltar some time ago, but I'll draw a veil over that. Let me start by introducing myself. I was actually born in London. In fact, I was born within the sound of Bow Bells. So that makes me one of those rarest of creatures, a Welsh Cockney. I grew up, however, in North Wales, spent my youth in the idyllic Vale of Clwyd, the home of the Flint and Denby Hunt, and my upbringing taught me that the countryside way of life is perhaps the truest expression of the British character, independent, self-reliant, yet rooted in the ideal of community. And today, I want to talk about what we can all do to help preserve that character. Not, as Greg said, as a museum piece, but a living tradition that is now sadly under pressure because successive governments of various stripes have drifted away from the countryside. Too many decisions about the countryside are made by people who have never dirtied a pair of boots. In fact, that's literally true. You probably remember some time ago that the then Environment Secretary Steve Reed was berated because he turned up in a pair of £420 Le Chameau designer boots to meet the president of the National Farmers Union. They were apparently a gift from Lord Alley, who you'll remember is the gentleman who supplies the Prime Minister with his suits and his spectacles. But the fact is that rules are imposed by people from remote cloistered offices in Whitehall, in Cardiff, in Edinburgh, and indeed still from Brussels. And they're stifling those who know the land best. There has been an institutional loss of respect for practical experience, which has been replaced by a technocratic urban ideology and performative politics. And because I suspect it may well be dear to your hearts, I'd like to talk a bit about field sports. Let me be clear at the outset. I have never hunted, nor have I ever participated in game shooting. But I do know that field sports are not mere indulgences. They're a cornerstone of conservation. Managed landscapes create habitats that would otherwise vanish, and gamekeepers are among the best conservationists in Britain. Controlled management of deer, pheasant, and grouse populations preserves balance and biodiversity, which is what we're told precisely what the government is seeking to achieve. But increasingly, the political class prefers shaky theory to hard evidence, banning, circumscribing, or restricting what it doesn't understand, or against which it's got a completely unfounded prejudice. So, to repeat, I've never hunted, but I recognize that very many decent, law-abiding people do, they always have done, and their activities are positively beneficial to the natural environment. Hunting with dogs, as we know, was banned by Tony Blair's government 20 years ago. And whatever one's view of that, it should have drawn a line under the issue. But it hasn't. Here we are again, 20 years later, with a Labour government elected on a manifesto commitment to ban trail hunting, even though no animal is ever pursued. As Nigel Farage said, you may as well simply ban people riding horses and be done with it. Despite what Labour say, this is not an issue of principle. It's, to be blunt, an act of vindictiveness on the part of the Labour Party. And if the ban on trail hunting proceeds, it does deserve to be overturned by a future government that is more enlightened and less prejudiced. So let me be very clear on this point. If this government bans trail hunting, an activity in which no animal is pursued, the next Reform UK government will reverse that ban. Because this is not an issue of animal welfare, as we've heard this morning from very erudite people. It's an issue of cultural warfare. It's about the denial of freedom, the freedom of rural people and rural communities to live their lives without being told how to do so by people who simply don't or don't want to understand them. And part of the problem is that Labour is now essentially an urban party. Its instincts, its language, its funders, all are rooted in the cities. It no longer understands the countryside, if ever it did, and all too often, it's actively hostile to it. In Wales, where I come from, the devolved Labour administration has already outlawed pheasant shooting on government land. And now it's actively considering licensing the release of game birds. They say it's about biodiversity, but what it's really about is bureaucratic control. It's not a ban in name, but it will work like one in practice. It will strangle rural enterprise with red tape. And this comes from the same urban mindset that wants to outlaw trail hunting. It's a mindset that sneers and snipes at a way of life that these people don't understand and want to destroy. The quiet dignity of those who understand the land, who rise before dawn to do a solid day's work, and who care for the landscape, not out of ideology, but out of love and duty, and because that's what they've always done. But Labour isn't content simply with attacking field sports. It's pursuing a full-scale assault on the livelihoods of rural communities. Its plan to slash agricultural property relief on inheritance tax would devastate family farms, forcing many to sell land that has been worked by those same families for generations. Labour call it fairness. In truth, it's vandalism. It will shatter the continuity that sustains rural Britain. The consequences will be the dismemberment of agricultural holdings that have supported generations of families, workers, keepers, and those who form the very backbone of our rural communities. Without those individuals, the countryside will hollow out. Young people will be priced out. Old traditions will be extinguished. Local economies broken. That will be the real consequence of Labour's urban ideology, which they dress up as reform. The truth is that the countryside is one community that they still feel free to victimize. They wouldn't belittle any other minority group in the same way, but they think nothing of deriding those who feed the nation and who care for its landscapes and its wildlife. They look at people who tend the land, who manage the woods, who rear livestock, or take part in field sports, and they see something out of kilter with their worldview, something to be legislated out of existence. But, ladies and gentlemen, they should remember this. The countryside votes. Rural people will, and frankly, they must, give their support to those who are motivated not by vindictiveness, but by fairness and decency, and not to overstate it, by the cause of freedom itself. Because that essentially is what this is all about. Freedom. The freedom to live, to work, to preserve and to hand on the inheritance of rural Britain to the next generation. And all this matters because there is a pattern to rural life. Farms, small rural businesses and village communities are bound together. The health of one depends on the health of the others. If one element of the countryside is weakened, the rest are all imperiled. And that's why we should all feel so strongly about what is happening now. The countryside is not a playground. It's a living inheritance. It's built on generations of work and care. And if we lose that, we don't just lose jobs or traditions. We lose part of what it means to be ourselves, the part that reminds us who we are and where we came from. So, what is the stance of Reform UK? Well, it probably won't surprise you that it's rather different from Labour's. We believe in partnership, not prohibition, in evidence, not ideology, and in respect for those who live and work closest to the land. We support farmers as custodians of the countryside. We don't demonize them as villains. We oppose excessive regulation and environmental dogma. We recognize that biodiversity depends on active management, not abandonment. And we will always stand up for rural Britain as part of one nation, not as a forgotten backwater. So let me conclude by saying this. The countryside is not a theme park. It's not just a playground for urbanites. The countryside is where the soul of Britain still resides, living and breathing, the very best of our nation. If we lose our rural traditions, we lose the link between past and future, between culture and landscape, between people and nature. And we in Reform intend to defend that link, not as Luddites, not in defiance of change, but to ensure that change does not obliterate who or what we are. Together, we must do everything in our power to keep the countryside alive, to see it thrive for generations to come. And together, we will keep rural Britain alive, productive, proud, and free. Thank you very much.
A political commitment to repeal any future ban on trail hunting. I think we'll have another round of applause, please. Thank you, David. Thank you so much. Right, questions. What we're going to do is give you this microphone here between you, and I'm going to go to the floor. I'll still be holding the microphone. We have a question. And I favour questions particularly about what we can do and what they know about what's coming up, please. Let's start here.
Got it. Bill Gash. I've come up from Somerset today. Firstly, I think we should probably all appreciate in the room that Labour doesn't need the countryside vote to win, hold a majority and form government in the future. So let's be clear on that one. Secondly, if you look at our constituency in Tiverton Minehead, we lost by 2,000 votes on seating the incumbent Conservative MP with a Liberal Democrat candidate, and the 2,000 margin was precisely how much the Reform vote counted. So that's where we lost that seat, I'm afraid. My question for the two of you really is a question that Charlotte raised earlier. A lot of people in the countryside will support what both of you are saying. There's, thin bit of paper between them. But actually, the people you need to target are people in urban areas concerned, or should be concerned, about what's happening in the countryside. And I'd like to know what you would do to address that part of the population, not even living in the countryside, but will share a concern for it. Thank you.
Thank you. We very nearly had Rachel Gilmore, your Lib Dem MP here, actually, but she couldn't unfortunately make it. Right. Would one of you like to take that, please? Targeting, should we be persuading more people in urban areas about our message, our clarity, dignity, evidence message, Greg? Is that the way forward?
It's definitely part of it. There are two straightforward battles right now. There is the battle between now and whenever the next general election comes, which, much as I would like to see much more fundamental change in a positive way towards our direction, i.e. the opposite direction Labour would take, I fear that right now the practical political reality with the size of their majority in the House of Commons is a battle to keep what we've got. Much as I would love better than that.
So we're batting away.
Keeping what we have got is the mission for the next few years until we can secure a change of government, what clearly I hope will be a Conservative government. The next step, though, is to set out the pitch for what comes next. And that has to be the countryside having their voice heard. Now, it's very clear on those big things that Labour have already done in power, that my party is absolutely committed to reversing the family farm tax, which is the biggest threat to the countryside right now, but also engaging in a policy renewal that we're doing right now. We're doing something that political parties only really do twice a century. There's no sugarcoating the result we got in July 2024. We're doing this deep dive. We last did it in the 1970s. Labour last did it in the 1990s. That dive back to base principles and rebuild from principles. What I would gently say was possibly the best line in Kemi's conference speech that sang to me was that Labour fail the country when they stick to their principles, and we fail the country sometimes when we forget ours. And I think in the last government we did forget our principles in a few areas, and we've got to put our hands up to that and build back up from true Conservative principles. And being the champions of the countryside again and rural pursuits is an important part of that. But let me give you this one anecdote. There's this thing in politics, I mean, it's less common now, but it's still a thing, that you're supposed to fight an unwinnable seat before you can have a go at something that you might win. And in 2017, before I was elected to Parliament in 2019, in the old Buckingham seat before the Boundary Commission abolished it, I got to fight against John McDonnell in Hayes and Harlington. Even when Theresa May was predicted to have a 200 majority in the House of Commons, Hayes and Harlington wasn't one of them. Very urban. It's the seat where Heathrow Airport is. And I was staggered. I was this Tory candidate that had no hope of winning. I was doing it to cut my teeth in parliamentary elections. Throughout that campaign, everyone knew I wasn't going to win, so not many people really lobbied me. I think I had 500 or 600 emails over the course of that 5-6 week general election campaign from constituents in Hayes and Harlington. 496 of them were about hunting. That is an absurdity, a total absurdity.
That's extraordinary.
That the urban vote was so obsessed by it. And I think trying to just get
just a modicum of understanding of what actually happens in the countryside compared to what Countryfile tells them happens in the countryside would be a massive step forward.
It is we consider it a real issue, but I think the real issues you're talking about are things more like the agricultural economy. It is, in Labour's terms, a totemic issue, isn't it? Therefore, does it not really matter in terms of the politics of the next election?
Of course it matters. For Labour, it's ideological, but the name of the game is to get Labour out of government. It's to get the party that, frankly, and there's no other way of putting this, seems to hate the countryside. Everything they've done since they've come into government, the family farm tax, abolishing, stopping SFI early, even deciding that a double cab pickup is a family car, not something that lots of farmers, might have children and might need a double cab pickup in order to put the kids in the back and still go about their business. The taxation regime they've changed on that, all the way through to their total ideological hatred of any form of rural pursuit. At the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Shooting and Conservation, before Starmer did his reshuffle, we had Diana Johnson when she was the policing minister in front of us. Fair play to her. She did come and answer our questions. But this subject of shotguns, them consulting on shotguns going from Section 2 to Section 1 firearms in the licensing regime. I asked her, well, why? Why are you consulting on this? To which her answer was confusingly, well, it's a consultation. I said, well, yeah, I understand it's a consultation, Minister, but why? What is the problem you are trying to solve here? And she just couldn't. She couldn't actually give any justification for why they are even consulting on that. And what that says to me is that it's yet again another ideological drive to try and reduce the number of privately held shotguns and firearms in this country that are held for perfectly legal and legitimate purposes.
Can you pass the mic to David? David, where would you concentrate your fire? If you're among this audience here, what would you do?
Yes, the question, as I understood it, was how can we communicate the message that hunting is a responsible and respectable activity to the urban areas? I think there are various things that you can do. One really is an educational process. And frankly, if we could get as many urbanites listening to the sort of talk we heard first thing this morning from Nick Fox and from David Rennie, which were absolutely superb. They were founded upon fact and science, and I would have thought the arguments made there would be pretty unanswerable. So I think that's one of the first things that we can do. But the other thing, of course, is the issue of politics. As Greg rightly says, we've got a Labour government with an absolutely monstrous majority at the moment. And whatever they want to do, let's be realistic, they will do. And there is nothing that any other party can do. So really, I think that people sitting in this room and people in the country generally have to start organizing politically themselves. You're going to have to make an assessment as to whether or not you want to get involved in the next election campaign, and if you do, get started as soon as possible. And one other thing I would mention is this. The big problem that we've got, as I outlined in my talk, is that you've now got this divide between the rural and the urban areas. Increasingly, people who live in the urban areas don't understand the countryside. And they've been represented historically, and in fact more recently, by an urban Labour Party, which I believe, and I think Greg agrees with me, is positively hostile to the countryside and the country way of life. I was a member of the Conservative Party for longer than Greg's been alive. And last October, I reflected upon what had happened in the last Parliament. And I realized that I'd spent at least half of that Parliament strongly disapproving of more or less everything that my party in government was doing and voting against it serially. And I realized that if those people were conservatives, I frankly was no longer a conservative. So I wrote to the party chairman in October and said, I'm writing to you as a matter of courtesy to let you know that I shall not be renewing my party membership when it falls due in January. I received no reply. So that tended to make me think that he didn't really care very much if I went anyway. But what I would say is this, and I'm sorry to strike a discordant note with Greg, but I joined Reform in January, and I don't think I've been so happy politically for very many years. The sort of people I'm surrounded by in Reform are pretty much the same people who surrounded me in the Conservative Party 10 years ago. And Reform has got the facility to go places where the Conservative Party can't. It can go into the urban areas. It can attract votes there too. So what I would say, and this is a terrible advertisement and I do apologize for it, but if you want to get involved politically, you might want to give some thought to Reform, because I think you'll be happy there.
All right, well, other parties are available. You will know, everybody will make up their own minds about that. But when you say get involved, this is the bit I'd like to know about. What do you mean? Do you mean going to the candidates you prefer and saying, I will give you my time, my money? What is it?
Well, I remember, I mean, many of you probably were involved with Hunt OK.
Vote OK.
Forgive me, Vote OK a few years ago. And frankly, I've got a lot to thank Vote OK for. I won in 2005 with a majority of 133. And frankly, if Vote OK had not been involved and those members of the Hunt had not been involved, I wouldn't have got to Parliament in the first place. But that's fine. I mean, you know, Hunt supporters are great. They're all usually pretty fit. They can cover huge areas of territory, and they can do a great job of leafleting. It's more than that, though, this time. I really honestly think that everybody who cares about the countryside, who cares about the rural way of life, who cares about field sports, has got to get a lot more vocal and a lot more politically involved. Okay. So yes, donations, activism, everything else that goes with being a member of a political party.
Everything we can get involved. Right, I'm going to come to Dennis next, so I'm going to come to the back. Dennis.
The thrust of everybody speaking is that the countryside has to get out there and vote and get get everybody involved. But as the urban populations continue to outnumber you, how do you plan to do that?
Greg, do you want to take that one while we've got you?
This is the urban population's a lot bigger than the rural one.
Correct.
Well, of course, all political parties have to set out our pitch to the whole country. And I mean, look, my pitch will always be inherently rural because my constituency is 336 square miles of Buckinghamshire. My largest town is Princes Risborough, population 8,000. So that gives you a pretty clear picture of what my constituency looks like. But of course, you know, Conservatives need to win in the urban areas again as well. That's not saying, you know, we're not actually the MP that has the largest share of the vote of any of the 119 of us that are left is actually Bob Blackman in Harrow, who was the only one of us to get over 50% of the popular vote last July. Our pitch has to speak to the whole country, but within that, we need to have a clear rural message that supports the rural economy, that supports the rural way of life, that gets rid of the bonkers stuff that Labour is set about and has already set about doing in government. But actually, if you think about it, from the policies that my party already have announced, abolishing stamp duty speaks to an urban community as much as it speaks to a rural community, because people are struggling to get onto the housing ladder and indeed move up and down the housing ladder in all communities of our country. So yes, the rural message per se is not going to win any one party, including my own, the next general election, but it is a very, very important part of it to ensure that we are maintaining our cultural heritage as a country in rural communities.
Do we risk dividing the vote if we make this urban-rural point? Do we risk damaging our own cause? Because only between 11 and 17% of us live beyond the streetlights.
No, I think we need to ensure that the rural voice is heard loud and clear, and that the policy is, you can never have your conflict between urban and rural in a manifesto, in a programme for government. Labour somehow have pulled that off in some way, in that they do have 60 or so at least part rural seats, but I think that was more by accident than design, if we're very fair about it. So it's clarity on our rural messaging as well as a message to the whole country.
David.
Yes, that's an important question, but I think we ought to consider this. To everybody in this room, the issue of hunting is extremely important. In fact, for many of you, I guess, it's the top political issue that there is. For the mass of the population, however, including people in the urban areas, it's not an issue at all. It's not something they ever consider. And you actually, in your presentation, I think, gave a very full outline of the way that people are being gaslighted. People in the urban areas are led to believe that hunting is an inherently cruel, sadistic exercise that really ought to be shunned. Which is why I go back to what I said earlier on. I think that presentations such as the one that you gave and that Mr. Rennie and Mr. Fox gave would be very well received by people who don't really think about the issue of hunting at all. The fact is that the issues that win elections are the bread and butter issues. It's the issue of the cost of living, the NHS, education. This is what people really care about, and this is what they vote for. And so, just to revert to the point about becoming political, I think that if you want to become political, you're going to have to reconcile yourself to the fact that you'll be talking about the NHS and the cost of living and so on and so forth, as well as hunting. But if you want to achieve your end, you do have to become political and get involved politically.
That's it, right. Well, the good news is that this conference is going to be available on video thanks to Hunting Kind. I'm going to come to the back where I can see hands up. Sorry, I'm going to go to I think that's the first one. We'll come back to you.
All the pressure. I actually worked for Vote UK, and coming out the tube earlier really brought back all the telecanvassing we did on. We did it for the Conservatives in 2015 on the agreement that you'd try and repeal the Hunting Act. Obviously, that didn't happen, and I can't help but believe that when you open a newspaper, as you guys say, that hunting is such a low priority, that it will always, when you're in the back of a boardroom, you're going to negotiate and decide who's going to vote on what policies. Hunting will always fall by the wayside. I think that a lot of my generation, I think a lot of people have become frustrated with the Conservatives. There's been a lot of kind of broken promises. But I equally think that reform is splitting the vote. So I'm just wondering, when are you two actually just going to sit down, decide to be friends, and make an agreement, stop running against each other, and let's kind of get Labour out. They didn't even win by, they statistically, I believe, got less votes this election than when Boris Johnson got into power. I don't know if that's correct, fact check. But I just think you two need to all, Reform and Conservative, you're splitting the vote. You need to sit down, not run against each other, and we will get back into power and we can get hunting back.
Well, there you go. David, if you could give her an answer to that one, I'm afraid we'll be knocking you off the front page tomorrow. Can you? Have you got an answer for Greg? Have you got an answer for that one? I mean, is there any possibility, do you think?
Look, as I said earlier, the Conservative Party is doing something under Kemi Badenoch that political parties do once every 50 years or so. We're going back to real conservative principles. I put my hands up earlier and said we forgot some of our principles when we were in government last time. We did make some significant we did make some significant mistakes, and we paid the price for that in July 2024.
Is your door open?
We are rebuilding, and hopefully, when we've got that policy offer ready for the 2029 general election, our aim is to be authentically conservative again and to ensure that we can excite the British people to vote for us again.
Okay.
But on terms of friendship, I was David's friend when we sat together in the House of Commons as Conservatives, and whilst I disagree with his move over to another party, he is still my friend.
Good. David, would you ever be another authentic Conservative?
Well, look, you made the point about broken promises, and in defense of the Conservative Party, which I do very rarely these days, I think I have to point out that we actually lost the 2005 election. The 2010 election we won, but had to have the support of the Lib Dems, who wouldn't let us do what we wanted to do. After 2015, we had the focus upon Europe and the referendum, which of course resulted in the departure of David Cameron and all the rest of the travails that we endured. And then, of course, after that, we had the COVID pandemic. So, you know, there were other things going on at the time, apart from hunting, to focus the minds of government. I would have loved to have seen the hunting ban overturned, but, you know, I mean, it was impossible. In terms of getting together with the Conservatives, Greg is a friend. Greg is a proper Tory. I'm a proper Tory. But the Conservative Party is stuffed with people who are not proper Tories. There are loads of Lib Dems there. There probably, I would guess, at least a third of the Conservative Party is Lib Dem. And the other thing that you have to consider is this, and I'm sorry to rub it in, Greg, but the Conservative Party, the Conservative brand is toxic.
All right, Dave. I think you said it.
No, hang on a second. It's a political point. I'm not actually. I'm not throwing brickbats.
I did promise Greg we wouldn't do this.
This is a political analysis. Charlie, please allow me. The reason why we will not join up with a Conservative Party is because we want to restore right-wing principles in government, and the vehicle for doing that is not the Conservative Party anymore, it's Reform UK. And I would suggest to you strongly that you vote Reform UK and you don't agonize about splitting the right-wing vote. If enough people vote, we will get the result we need.
Thank you. Right, that's enough of that. Let's move on, yes.
What do I hold? There's only one small part of this kingdom which has a political party which backs the restoration of hunting, Plaid Cymru. And didn't they do well last week? I know neither of the two parties sitting there on the bench will commit in their manifestos to a restoration of hunting, but will either of you commit to a full review of the Wildlife Act?
Wildlife and Countryside Act, 1981, 30 years overdue for review. Do you want to start with that, David?
Well, since Plaid Cymru was mentioned, I think I better. Plaid Cymru is a left-wing socialist party. Historically, over the last 26 years since the implementation of devolution in Wales, they have propped Labour up. At the moment, it looks as if they're going to do better than Labour, and they will then be propped up by Labour. Don't be deceived by Plaid Cymru. They're a left-wing party, and you know, you have to take them with a huge, huge pinch of salt.
But they are pro-hunting.
Well, they may well be pro-hunting, but they will take your money, they will educate your children badly, and they'll leave you with a bad health service. So, you know, I mean, it depends what you want. In terms of a commitment, I've made a commitment today on behalf of Reform UK that if a ban on trail hunting is implemented, as it looks if it will be, we will reverse it. In terms of review of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, yes, this is something that Reform UK do want to do. In terms of a reversal of the ban, well, you have to remember what Otto von Bismarck said. And he said that politics is the art of the possible. And I'll be frank with you, I want to be honest with you, I don't believe that there is an appetite in this country at the moment for a reversal of the ban. So, you know, I think that I've done probably as much as I can by making the commitment I have to you this afternoon.
Thank you. Greg, you've got a division bell ringing at the moment, so could you give your answer, please, and then I will let you go.
Okay, I think this will be my last one because looking at the screen next to me, I think I've got to go and vote shortly. However, Feed in to your local Conservative association. Where you've got a Conservative MP, feed in that you want to see that. Our policy review is serious. It's not just knee-jerking new policy reactions out left, right and centre. It is a serious thought-through policy review. And if that's what you want to see, tell your local Conservative association, your local Conservative MP, what you want to see in our manifesto on that front. But for the wider party, that policy isn't written yet. We are doing this serious policy review. What I can say, that I've said very publicly in my own constituency, in Hustings and so on, is if there were a vote to fully repeal the Hunting Act, I would vote, personally, to fully repeal the Hunting Act. That is a very clear position I've been consistent on. On others, yeah, we have got to look at legislation that is getting in the way of evidence-based conservation and maintaining our rural communities and landscapes, and ensure that legislation is fit for purpose, because for too long legislation has been passed that doesn't work for us, and it is important that you feed your views in on that to the Conservative Party.
If all of us wrote to our constituency MPs, and that we are from all over the country in this room, and we asked for a review of the 1981 Wildlife and Countryside Act, do you think that will make it into the various manifestos?
The policy review is serious, and the more people that make serious, evidence-based proposals into our Shadow DEFRA team and into the wider Conservative policy review, the better the chance of that being heard.
Good. Thank you, Greg. We'll let you go. Please give a round of applause for Greg Smith. Thank you very much. David, you can stay where you are. David. No, David, David, you can stay where you are. It's going to be just you from now on. Right, we have another question. Okay, do you have another question? Hand up here. Dr. Nick Fox. Watch out for this one. This is Sly Fox, this one.
Not really. A question for you. If we could get a review of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, I've been in the middle of a lot of these arguments, and here in Britain we have a lot of the organisations polarised. We've got the RSPCA and the RSPB and so on one side, saying that you're not allowed to do things with grouse moors and so on. And then you've got the Game Conservancy and the Countryside Alliance on the other, and they're confrontational head-to-head. Now, Niels portrayed to us earlier on in Denmark a Game Management Council, I think that's what it was called.
Wildlife Management Council.
Wildlife Management Council, and in that they got together all the different factions round the table, knocking heads together, and rather than having a slagging match out in the press and the media, they were having to sit down and talk about each other's views and reach a consensus. And I wonder if we could get a Wildlife and Countryside Act, we could have written within it a structure such as that, designed to implement it, rather than just having laws and clauses, you've still got to translate that into living action. And we don't really have a mechanism. We have things like Natural England and so on, but we're just all in bits at the moment.
Is asking for a Wildlife Management Council too much detail for our MPs to cope with if they're going to feed it into national policy?
Well, it shouldn't be, but you make a very interesting point, Nick. One of the problems we got in Wales, and by the way, I'm helping to write the Welsh manifesto for the elections next year. One of the issues we got in Wales is that we've got this superabundance of quangos. Quangos are coming out of the skirting board, and they are frequently pulling in different directions. So one of the ideas I've got is that there should be a foundational principle for the work of all these bodies, so that whatever they do, it will be judged against the foundational principle. that should, I think, have a very beneficial effect, because if people are pulling in different directions in the way that you describe, there should be a means of adjudicating among them and making sure that you come up with a policy that is sensible and has the majority of support, and that all these bodies would then have to abide by. But it is an issue. I mean, you've got, for example, in the animal welfare environment, you've got bodies who have totally different views about what animal welfare means. We've heard about animal rights. There are different views of it, and I think that we do need to have a mechanism of the sort that I've just outlined to help adjudicate among these various competing bodies.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. David Jones.